America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reese Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reese Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
Hey y'all, welcome to Cross Politic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. It's so good to have Knox in the studio. I feel like my third leg is broken every time when Knox isn't here.
The third leg?
Yep, because you're my second and I'm number one.
Okay. What? I don't even know what that means.
Works,
I translate, it says it's just an awkward feeling.
It's a three-legged stool.
Okay, that's got you. All right.
The mission of Armored Republic is to honor Christ by equipping free men with tools of liberty necessary to preserve God-given rights. In the Armored Republic, there's no king but Christ, where free craftsman body armor is a tool of liberty. We create tools of liberty. Free men must remain ever vigilant against tyranny wherever it appears. God has given us the tools of liberty needed to defend the rights he's bestowed upon us, and Armored Republic is honored to offer you those tools. They make body armor. Visit them at ar500armor.com. That's AR, the number 500armor.com.
Can I just give them like a little, since we started off with their ad and we just read their ad, I just want to do things in threes, three-legged stool.
Don't break one.
If you have at all been paying attention to what's going on the suburb of Denver and in Chicago, where you have these people infiltrating apartment complexes and taking
Illegal
them over.
immigrants.
People who aren't citizens of America. And I just think it might be a good time to stock up on some body armor in case you're a Christian brother and happen to have a problem that you need to go help them out with.
That's how you love your neighbor.
Since it seems the civil magistrate don't care.
Whoa.
How did they take the building?
Be careful, our board might start wigging out.
I'm sorry. I just don't understand. I'm just trying to figure out. Where's the sheriff?
I was talking to my kids about this, and they were like, so what do they do when something breaks?
They call the plumber.
But, it's an apartment complex, they don't own it. Like, they're not the owner.
Yeah.
So, you have to call the, landlord or, they're not going to actually come, are they?
Yeah.
Well,
are they delivering pizza?
I have to believe that if they have guns, they taking over places, they're going to figure out how to get the plumbing fixed. But
I don't know.
But I'm more concerned about, I know this is not what we're going to talk about. I'm just saying if you want to buy you some armors, now is a good time to get you some. But where's the sheriff?
Yeah. Well,
I'd be having a campaign right now. We are not reelecting you, whatever your name is.
Exactly.
We are not. We don't want you.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. In Chicago, I've seen some of the stuff happening in Chicago, and one of the guys on TikTok said, I just want y'all to know, this ain't Venezuela. We going to act a little different here. Yeah. And it's bad because if stuff starts happening where you got gang members like, yo, my mama's in that place.
Right.
Yeah, right.
That's not, sure, they might get them out. That's not going to be good for anybody there, though.
It's going to be a mess.
This is insane. So get you some body armor, because you just might need it just to walk down the street.
Today's culture shifts like sand, but New St. Andrews College is established on Christ, the immovable rock. The college is a premier institution that forges evangelical leaders who don't fear or hate the world. Guided by God's word, equipped with the genius of classical liberal arts and God-honoring wisdom, with a faculty dedicated to academic rigor and to God's kingdom, New St. Andrews College offers an education that frees people. Logic and language, hard work and joyful courage, old books and godly professors. New St. Andrews College provides time-tested resources that can equip your student for any vocation. To find out more, visit www.nsa.edu. It just says nsa.edu, and I was just reading it.
Hopeful skeptic in our YouTube thread said they're probably smuggling a plumber across the border anyways.
Did you see what K Glass said? K Glass said that New York's 75% crime is illegals.
Ooh.
What's
75% of the crime
is illegals. Oh, wow. Okay.
All right. So we got shepherds for sale. Okay.
There probably needs to be a preface to this.
Yeah. I'm doing it right now. That's what this is.
This is the preface.
Now, Megan was scheduled to come on the show, and she still might come on. But that girl's been busy these last couple weeks, so she honestly might have had a little scheduling conflict there and all that. Or she's walking her dog.
So she's
probably walking her dog.
This could be, I was going to say, this could be the most disappointing show we've ever done, especially if you were expecting Megan Basham.
Yeah, that's right.
But
because it says it in the title, with Megan Basham.
Well, it is with her.
She's with her in spirit.
And her words. Yeah. Her words are with us. Many of them are with us.
So I think her. I've been, obviously I read through a lot of her book.
Does she know she's supposed to be on the show?
Yeah, she does.
Oh,
yeah,
she does. Okay.
Yeah.
Does she remember that we gave her the JL award?
We might take it back.
Megan, I just want to know who's more important than us. I just want to know.
Well, she's okay. She's probably walking her dog. She got to Jordan Peterson levels.
Yeah.
And she's like, I don't need cross politic anymore.
I'm just walking my dog.
For everybody who doesn't know, Jordan Peterson was supposed to be on the show. He had an interview and canceled on us, and we just assumed that he was walking his dog because that was more important.
You gotta go. That was 2017.
That was 4 or 5 years ago.
Dog's man best friend, Yeah.
So, as we kind of think about the church and what's gone on with the church for the last century or so, the gospel had been we were constantly told that the gospel is primary, and that now in our modern time, climate change and these other issues all became secondary issues.
Yeah,
right.
And now it's like, in a sense, they're becoming primary issues again in the church. I mean, Gavin Ortland's talking about climate change. I mean, the ERLC's talking about immigration. All of a sudden, these secondary issues, they're allowed to be talked about again, but only from really a liberal perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, climate change, illegal immigration, hijacking the pro-life movement, Christian media and the money, propaganda, COVID-19, critical race.
The only thing that was acceptable, even in COVID, the only thing that was acceptable was the leftist agenda and the Christians that had jumped on to the leftist agenda.
Well, I think this is.
Some of it wasn't even the leftist agenda. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is an infiltration. I think this is the infiltration of secularism in the church, and a misunderstanding at best of what it means to be sort of gospel centered. And I think you have, and I think it was a lie that has infiltrated the church, I think probably seminaries as well, that said basically what you need to do is you need to protect that center.
Yeah.
Justification by faith alone, substitutionary atonement, inerrancy of scripture, even like, 5 points of Calvinism or whatever in Reformed churches.
Yeah.
But you need to hold that center. And then the idea was these other issues they're secular.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
The other issues they're political.
Yeah. We don't want to split the church over politics.
They're secular, and good people disagree.
And then giving your time to go work on a campaign or to be in politics to try and change laws around the things that you think are biblical. Not so much should deserve your attention.
Exactly. And I think probably 50, 60 years ago, that perimeter of topics, immigration, taxation, I don't know, sexuality, whatever, like it was still like you still had more Christian influence broadly.
Oh, I mean,
and so you have, and so you can kind of leave it, and nothing falls apart right away. Like, I mean, there's people doing bad stuff and stuff you disagree with, but it's like it's still broadly moral, broadly Christian. Good people differ, and I think that what happened was we bought the lie. That's political. That's secular. The thing that we need to guard is the gospel.
We bought the lie that
those things are not connected to the gospel.
Okay.
That those things are not connected to allegiance to Jesus. That the lordship of Christ extends to
climate change,
right, and illegal and immigration policy and taxation policy and all these things that we said are just secular. And what I told Knox just before the show is I think maybe one way to just summarize it would be you might not think those things are related to the gospel, but the devil does.
That's right. That's right.
Yes,
the devil does, and so that leaves us with these wide open flanks that nobody's protecting.
So
go ahead.
And I'm probably stealing a little bit of your point. Climate change, immigration, these issues have not really received tons of teaching from the church, except for Rushdoony.
Right.
Rushdoony hit on a lot of this, especially with immigration.
Right.
And so it seems like you have kind of this, scattering of the sheep left to their own devices, left to their own thought to kind of sort through these things. And then Gavin Newsom comes out with, not Gavin Newsom. They aren't the same. I can't say that. That's, Gavin Ortland comes out and starts talking about climate change.
Right.
And then, what's ingenuous about, because I saw the video, I saw the controversy between Megan and Gavin, and I watched videos of Gavin talking about climate change, and he's kind of like saying, hey, this is a secondary issue, but it's a gospel issue. Or he's kind of talking about both sides of his mouth. This is a secondary issue, but if the church doesn't get this right,
Right.
you aren't loving your neighbor.
Right.
But then he says, but I want you to think about this.
Yeah, and it could it could mean the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I just want us to talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. So he's kind of like binding consciences in some sort of weird way.
Yeah.
And then stating things in such a way where it's like, okay, maybe this is not a secondary issue, like you're trying to cast it and everything.
Megan's not coming, is she?
I don't know.
This is
I'm into
not
the conversation.
No, I'm with you. I'm just saying. Megan's not coming. It's okay, Megan. We still love you.
Hey, she texted me. Let me see.
Oh.
But my point is,
She's walking her dog. She's walking her dog.
Does she know that you're live texting her? That they will. Tell her I said hi.
Hi, Meg. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Megan. She can't make it.
Could she do video, just audio?
We can figure that out. We want a Bluetooth her in or something like that. She can just do audio on the connection if you wanted to.
Hang on. My point is, by talking about this, it seems like, Knox, you pointed that earlier, where like a church council would probably be helpful on. We actually
we're about there right now.
The church council actually needs to come up with like an opinion on climate change.
Do you have the clip now? I want to play the clip. This is what's his name again? Chan, is that right? Curtis Chang. Chang. Thank you, Curtis Chang. Play the clip, and I want to talk about it real quick.
Then if people get mad, they get mad at Curtis, Russell, and David.
Hit pause.
They get less mad at you. You can.
So what this is Curtis pitching the idea that, hey, we know talking about politics and talking about all this stuff out there in the secular, that's difficult and it's hard. Why don't you have us teach your people about these things and these worldview? Russell Moore, David French, and myself, they can get mad at us. Yes. They can get mad at us, and then they can go ahead and have plausible. You can have plausible deniability.
Yeah, you can blame us.
Blame us for, oh yeah, well I didn't. Those are those guys.
You can outsource your discipleship.
Yes,
of the people in your church.
Keep playing.
Have plausible deniability, right? You could just say, hey, I don't agree with everything these guys say, but I think they're worth listening. That's the classic move, you do make as a pastor, right? You want to inject something, but not have to take all of the shots for it, which you shouldn't have to take all of the shots for. That should be part of our job, is to do that. That's the partnership here.
Man, every time you play that clip, it just...
it's so gay. I'm pretty sure he shaves his whole body.
How did you get
that? That's not what I was going to say. I'm just.
That's interesting, Gabe. I didn't know that you were thinking that.
Was that my mic?
You were talking out loud again, Gabe. You were talking out loud. But I always wonder.
It is the job of pastors.
Absolutely.
It is the job of pastors. That's the thing that so frustrates me. Is like your job is to lay your life down for the sheep.
That's right.
Can we go back for a second?
Your job is to love your sheep, to lay your life down for the sheep, to take the hardest things.
How about teach your sheep too?
Yeah, and that's what I mean.
Disciple.
And the hardest things, the most difficult things, whatever it might be in your church, whether it's politics, whether it's immigration, whether it's sexuality, whether it's manhood, womanhood, whatever it's child rearing, it's your job. If God's called you there, you're called to teach them patiently, not being bitter, not being resentful, not outsourcing discipleship, not outsourcing shepherding. But that's exactly what this is that. And you're right, Gabe. We outsource this to all the other to the world, CNN,
Fox.
That's right. That's who's been public schools who've been outsourcing all this discipleship.
If we get Megan, are we going to get Megan?
Yeah, Megan's actually done walking her dog.
Oh, cool.
So she's now in the studio.
Megan.
But she had to call in audibly. She texted me this total sob story about how rough her day is. But she's genuinely had a hard day.
She's really famous now.
Okay,
so,
I know. We
understand.
thought she was walking her dog. She's actually just having a difficult day. So she's very sweet to come in at this moment of the show
totally.
and everything. So Megan, thank you so much for making time to come into the show.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry. It has been a day. So I at least made it. Our poor friend, Ron Hensel, I was supposed to do an interview with him this afternoon and had to cancel. So
Who's Ron?
I'm here.
You know Ron?
We know Ron.
I never heard of him before.
Our boy from Florida. Ron's fantastic.
I'm just messing. I never want Ron coming after me.
Right?
No, Ron's fantastic.
Yeah, he's deadly.
He'll do a journalistic sting on you, and you'll be gone.
Your name's supposed to be David, but your real name is. I didn't even know, Ron. How did I? All right, Megan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing fine. Are you tired of having this conversation yet?
Well, the conversation has been evolving, so not really. As I have felt some frustration over some of the reaction, I suddenly find I have new things to say. So,
Really? Involving into what exactly?
well, I've had a lot of people coming at me with claims that they were misrepresented. And Toby wrote a great essay dealing with one of those claims, I thought, in particular, the Gavin Ortland dust up. Right. And then after that, there were some essays from Neil Shenby about J.D. Greer, claims that I misrepresented Tim Keller. And so as those things have been sort of unrolling and it feels like it's coming in waves, I'm just one person. So as it's coming at me from all sides, I find that I want to rush out and respond to those things. And I don't always get the chance. So it's nice to have opportunities to come on shows and talk about it.
Is there anything, I mean, besides kind of the evolving back and forth, is there anything that you're surprised that's not being brought up in this conversation?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is how little the focus has been on the actual fact of all of these hard left secular foundations coming into evangelical organizations and churches, like you guys were just talking about right before I came on with the after party, and that those who are critiquing the book tend to say, oh, it's a necessary conversation. Generally, they will say, generally, this is something that we should talk about, but they don't get into specifics about that. And I find it interesting that they kind of say, we should talk about this. And then they move right on to trying to defend their friends against some of the things that I present in the book. So they're saying we should talk about it, but then they don't really talk about it.
So is any of the people that you've come out and exposed, I guess is the right word, I was thinking of another word, have they actually admitted to the fact that they've taken money, like Christianity Today, what's the other company?
ERLC.
Trinity Reform, the
Trinity
Evangelicals
Forum. Trinity Forum.
Trinity Forum. Have they actually admitted to the fact that they've taken money from outside secular groups?
Well, I mean, you've seen like the after party say things like, yes, we are, but it's fine that we are. It's not a big deal. The ERLC never directly responded to me, but they did tacitly update their website to say, here is the portion of our budget that came from outside secular foundations, which in a way was also kind of their defense, because they're saying, well, it's not that much money. It's just a little part of our budget that we're taking money from this group that also promotes things like legalized prostitution and abortion. Therefore, it's fine that we worked particularly on a report about how Christians should engage politics with money from those people.
Right.
So I was going to save this for later in the interview, but I'm kind of already warmed up, Megan. I just wanted to know if you had to sit across from one person in your book that you've brought up in a Christian court, who would you want to sit across from and have it out with as far as in a Christian court situation?
Russell Moore, hands down. I think he's probably been the most influential person in bringing a lot of these things into evangelical institutions, particularly the Southern Baptist Convention. And I think so much of what he has said has gone uncross-examined that he's somebody that I would love to have in a court to be able to say things like, okay, you say that you were terrorized by the other leadership within the Southern Baptist Convention. What do you mean by that? What was your evidence for that?
Who did that?
What's that?
Yeah,
Who did that?
Who
Like,
exactly
who terrorized
Right.
them?
Who did that and how did they terrorize you?
Give me some names.
Because not only has he said it, but it was then, repeated in another best-selling book from Tim Alberta, and not as I presented some things as quotes directly from people who said, this is what I am saying happened. But Tim Alberta just presented these things as fact, not as a quote from Russell Moore, and also provided no evidence for how Russell Moore was supposedly hounded and terrorized. And that's a really strange way of reporting, to just use this hyperbolic language and then offer no actual evidence for what he's talking about.
I remember when Russell Moore left the ERLC, but months before he left the ERLC, there was like these tapes and conversations leaked. You remember that? Mm-hmm. Tapes and conversations leaked. And then one of Russell Moore's emails got leaked after he left the ERLC. Basically with charging with nefarious, the board, couldn't deal with the sexual sins in our, they couldn't, the executive board, had problems dealing with all this and everything. Megan, did you ever kind of dive into that and find out what was going on?
I did. And I spent a lot of time in the Me Too chapter tracing what his accusations were. And again, in typical Russell Moore style, they would be something like, children and women were ripped apart. Now, what did he mean by that? He doesn't say. And when you look at the actual claims that were brought to the executive committee, they didn't cover anything up. There's no evidence that they even privately spoke about some of these women who were stepping forward with accusations in anything but the most respectful terms. There's no evidence that they were brought to any claims of child sexual abuse going on and that they turned their backs on it or chose not to act. Nothing like that. So there's really no hard, concrete evidence for what he was talking about when he said these things, not only in these leaked letters, but also at conferences and things like that. Eventually, what you found out that, one of the people that he was referring to as this mistreated young woman was a woman who was by then almost 40, who had been in a relationship with a man who was older than her, but both of them were adults, and it's not entirely clear what happened. So maybe there was abuse, but we don't know. It was very much no one was there. We're having to take two people's words, and it wasn't investigated.
Mm-hmm. So we were talking. We were trying just
you keep hogging Megan, and I'm going to stab you
this is my second
in the leg.
question.
I'm just
I
letting
haven't
you know.
asked any questions, just for the record.
Yeah, you
That's okay.
started. You actually started asking them. You asked the first question.
No, I didn't.
Megan.
No.
We can go back and watch the tape.
Yeah, we didn't. I read the ads. That's
why she didn't come on the show earlier, guys. Go ahead.
You got to get all the fight out of them first before we come on. We started when offline when we were kind of talking about the show. It seems like a lot of the topics that are kind of a focus in your book, like immigration and environmentalism, and then maybe even the pro-life movement as it relates to social justice. Those are all quote unquote secondary doctrines, but now it seems like guys like Gavin Ortlund now have permission to talk about it because it's becoming kind of like the acceptable liberal dialogue in our society, and now he can talk about climate change in a way that's like, okay, it's a bigger issue. Maybe it's still not a gospel issue, but it's a bigger issue now, and we need to pay attention to it. So it seems very odd that for the church for decades, who was insisting that the gospel's the main thing, it's the main thing, and then all these issues are starting to pop up that are actually starting to cause a lot of problems in the church from guys like Gavin Ortlund. You got any thoughts on that?
Well, just that you seem to see a swapping of things that I would consider pretty clear political issues, like what should our immigration policy be? We just saw that viral video clip going out just in the last couple of days of David Platt saying that Christians of all people should not object to having refugees in their communities. And in a certain sense, I agree that we want to minister to refugees. We want to preach the gospel to them. But as a policy, there's a sense of you're tacitly imputing sin to people for not wanting to promote certain immigration policy. And then on the flip side, you have these very clear moral issues like the pro-life issue that's being watered down and called political by throwing in all these other issues. So saying, well, okay, yes, we can still be pro-life, but we're going to analyze it through an almost exclusively political lens, like saying it's not morally legitimate unless we're expanding the welfare state also to go along with whatever our pro-life stance is.
I'm sorry. As you were talking, I was thinking about the idea. Don't refugees eventually go home? Right?
That is not very gospel-hearted of you, Knox.
We gave him the title refugee. It's over. Things are done. Love you. You heard the gospel. Take it back with you. I don't understand. But that's not what people aren't using
There's
words.
no mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. The words are all getting convoluted, and they don't mean the same thing. And so they get this leverage into you so that you can say, oh, I guess I have to have them forever. It's like, no. You were a guest. I love having people over my house. But at some point, you got to go home.
You want to send me back to Ireland, don't you?
Well,
preferably by 2 p.m. so I can take a nap on Sunday.
You're not a refugee. See, that's my whole point.
Well, maybe my ancestors were.
Yeah, well, then we can have another conversation about that. Megan, part of... I kind of want to hear more of how you would cross-examine Russell Moore, just because that would make me feel good. One of the ways I was looking at your book, and there's tiers to this. I think we have levels of protection as it relates to the person in the pew. We have our pastors, our elders and deacons in our church, and then we have our institutions like, the ERLC, Southern Baptist Convention, and then Christian media. And I have a level of I'm upset at the higher levels of the institution that are supposed to be protecting us. But I'm really, really disappointed in the elders that are listening to that top tier, that are letting them infiltrate. The pastors that would let Curtis Chan come in and do this, those are the guys that I'm really starting to get very upset with, because I'm wondering, did we do something wrong in the way that we have educated our pastors and our institutions, that they would just open up the floodgates and not think biblically about some of the issues that are in front of us?
I mean, what I can tell you is that it seems to me like there is such a currency of respectability, and the thought of not being viewed as institutionally respectable is so disturbing to so many of these leaders that they won't even consider somebody like a Curtis Chang or a Russell Moore, who have these more elite associations, in any way deficient in how they've conducted their business, how they've conducted their ministry, to the point where I can tell you, I have heard from so many people who are now telling me, hey, I tried to get my pastor to read your book, but the word has already gone out, apparently, because they say, well, we've heard, they just said they don't think it's probably helpful. So they haven't read the book. They don't know what's in the book, but they've been told, we don't believe that this is helpful. So they're not even going to look at the information as to what some of these institutional leaders have been up to.
Wow.
I don't know if I would trust the guy, though. If he's supposed to be protecting my soul, and there's supposedly a threat at the gate, and he's like, I'm not even investigating.
I've heard it's probably not helpful.
I mean... There's a noise downstairs. Oh, baby, we're probably fine.
Yeah.
I want you to go down and check it out.
Yeah. Megan, you mentioned at the top of the show that there's sort of an evolution of conversation. You mentioned there was an initial kind of splash with Gavin Ortland responding, Neil Shenvi, JD Greer, I think, did a little response to as well.
She got them all to jump, didn't she?
And I'm just curious. Are there others, or what are the ones that maybe are you're wanting to respond to? It sounds like there's a lot going on. Haven't had a chance to necessarily respond to everybody, but what are maybe the ones that are continuing to rise to the top of that swirl?
Well, I mean, I would say Tim Keller is looming large over this, because if you look at something like the Gospel Coalition, it is in so many ways associated with his legacy. It has its new, I forget the name of the organization, but it's new Tim Keller Fellowship, and it has fellows. And so there's just a large apparatus being built around his legacy. So even if you're saying that, I'm not saying everything Tim Keller did wasn't good, or that there aren't really valuable things that Tim Keller also offered, but it feels like there's been this hagiography, so that if you are scrutinizing his legacy in any way, that's being viewed as a threat, to the point where some things that to me never in a million years did I think my saying Tim Keller viewed voting for Trump as uniquely discrediting. To me, there was such overwhelming evidence. I did not expect that to be a point on which there would be huge backlash. And I have a piece coming out in the American Spectator soon that addresses that. But there's such overwhelming evidence for that it just shocked me that so many people were going, well, okay, but this particular citation that you offer, doesn't by itself show that Tim Keller found voting for Trump uniquely discrediting, which is why I included other things in the body of the book itself.
Right.
But yeah, so that's been what's surprising me is people kind of want to just parse a particular citation and overlook the total breadth of Tim Keller's commentary. I mean, he wrote a piece for the New Yorker saying, "Can evangelicalism survive Donald Trump?"
Yeah.
He wasn't quiet about his position on that.
Do you think that is so? You began your answer by saying, you know, there's sort of this hagiography and they have this Tim Keller fellowship or whatever. So is it primarily about defending Keller's reputation, or do you think this is somehow connected to Trump and the politics?
I think it's probably more about defending Keller's reputation, because obviously his reputation is sort of bound up with he said, and this was another thing that sort of made me laugh, was Neil Shenby said, "I checked and Tim Keller has only tweeted about Trump a couple of times. And one of them was to say he's not a never Trumper or doesn't identify as a never Trumper." And that to me was like, when you have a friend who's constantly making racist jokes or derogatory comments about minorities, but then says, "but not to be racist."
Right.
They're demanding that you take the "but not to be racist" as the full breadth of his commentary rather than the weight of all of these other things that he has said. And that was kind of what I saw. I don't think at this point, the fact that they're kind of, and maybe they would vote for Trump, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. I think they just find Trump voters generally kind of icky.
So, first of all, if anybody ever wants to name a think tank after me, like, not that, it'd be a thought tank or
There's
something.
so many jokes. So many jokes.
Wait for me to be dead for like 500 years, okay? Megan, so Oz Guinness started the Trinity Forum, and he endorsed your book, but it also seems like Oz Guinness, the Trinity Forum, not Oz, has been, part of the problem now with the after party curriculum and partnering with David French and all that crew. What happened there?
Well, I think that is itself a story that deserves some writing, maybe not a full book, but some writing of some sort separate from my book, because I touched on this, but I didn't spend a lot of time on it because it was kind of outside of the scope. But what you see is these organizations that are really sound, they become really successful. And because of that success, they become targeted by secular, elite, influential organizations that see it and go, "Oh, we want to harness some of that influence for ourselves." And you see it all the time when the initial generation of leadership moves on or steps down. The next generation is kind of committed to expanding the opportunities for themselves in a way, going, "Okay, well, now that we're so legitimate, how do we make use of this legitimacy that we have with the dominant cultural centers of our world?" And I think that's what you saw with Trinity Forum. I think Oz built something really great. And because of that, it was really successful. And then you saw the next generation, which came incidentally out of the George W. Bush administration, come in with this sort of corporate mindset that said, now that we have this, how do we protect our legitimacy and our reputation? And part of the way they do that is by partnering with a lot of DC secular, well-respected and elite organizations. And then they go off. And I mean, as I said in the book, you can think of it as champagne ministry.
Yeah. This is what Pastor Wilson calls the suits and the haircuts phenomenon. He's talked about this for decades, but he said that, this is one of the things that he, has noticed about evangelicalism for decades. You get something good going and the suits and haircuts come in and they want to shrink wrap it and sell
package it
and sell it, which means that it has to sort of be tidy and neat and respectable.
Right.
And you can't do anything to wobble, which is one of the reasons why Pastor Wilson has worked so hard to actually make himself sort of unpackageable.
Yeah.
Right.
And wanted Moscow to have, that sort of, untamed.
Because what the men in business suits do is they turn your ministry into a memorial instead of a battleship. like we've talked about so much on the show.
Exactly.
Hey, Megan, I really enjoyed how you opened up your book in the introduction. You say, how do you solve a problem like the Christians? It took me off guard because the way that I see things, I haven't thought about Christians as being a problem. Right. I look at us and I think, man, we're weak. We can't get anything done. We can't really accomplish much. But going through and watching the attack that we're facing, we are more dangerous than we actually think we are, aren't we?
Yeah, when you look at the statistical evidence and the polling evidence, we are. And you can say that, yes, a lot of the leadership is weak, but as a voting bloc, as a cultural influence, evangelicals are kind of that firewall. I do remember the what was it, the last bulwark or something like that controversy. Yeah. But in a way, there was a lot of truth to that in the sense that evangelicals as a bloc tend to resist the things that even the GOP finds uncomfortable. And that was part of what I wanted to get at is that, look, a lot of the entrenched conservative Inc. organizations, they would just as soon see these social conservative evangelicals go away too. We make life uncomfortable for everyone because we have these backwards ideas like marriage is between one man and one woman, homosexuality is still a sin, and the life in the womb should be protected and should have equal protection under the law. And so we have all these ideas that people find just alien and uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about even just an illustration of that. We touched on it this last week when Trump was sort of being interrogated about the Florida, what is it? Proposition 4.
Proposition 4, yeah.
Amendment 4. Yeah. And initially kind of gave this vague answer like, he was going to vote for it possibly. Mm-hmm. And then like within 24 hours, I mean, there was a pretty significant backlash from pro-life evangelicals on social media, really, really criticizing that. And within 24 hours, there's another interview.
I saw that was amazing.
He's asked again about it, and he says, "No, he says 6 weeks is not enough time, but I can't go along with the Democrats who want to execute, full-term babies, so I'm going to vote no on it." But there's an example of the very thing you're talking about, Megan.
Right, and I have friends and I respect them a lot, and we disagreed on what our reaction should be to that. I had a lot of people that were not super happy with me for saying, hey, look, if I hope that pro-life voters do everything they can in this election to protect the gains that have been made and to ensure that we are able to capitalize on that Dobbs decision. But if they're not convinced to vote for this particular candidate that the GOP created a platform with that stripped very clear pro-life language out, then that will be his fault. So that's part of the leverage that voters have, is that we are supposed to demand certain things from our candidates, and we're supposed to make our candidates uncomfortable and make them feel like, I got to appease these guys because that's the art of politics. And I think it worked. So, yay, we did what we were supposed to do. Right. We were salt and light in that particular situation.
Right.
Megan, so everybody's supposed to go out and buy your book. And after they buy your book and it becomes, can you become like twice New York Times bestseller? Can you do it over and over again? I don't know if you can do it. Anyway, after it goes platinum, what are people supposed to do with this? What are they supposed to do with this book now?
Well, some of the things I talk about as you get towards the end is I try to give some examples of people who managed to hold off the Goliaths. One of them was Cal Beisner. I talk about him a lot, and it's been interesting how many people have come forward and said, how do I get in touch with him? Or tell me more about Cal Beisner. And that's been really encouraging to me, how many people have wanted to know about those who successfully have held the line against this incursion of progressive politics. And he has done it, basically, as I retell in my book, he's just a guy who was a professor, who was part-time, sounding the alarm about how this left-wing money and influence was coming into the church to try to draft evangelicals into the cause of climate change and how to get them to promote climate change regulation and cap and trade carbon emission limits and things like that. He on his own sort of faced down, and they admit this in some of their documents, that he faced down all of these huge organizations and won. So that's one. And then the other thing is, I do want to encourage evangelicals to kind of recognize their power, because I think there has been a very successful gambit in so much publishing and so much ministry narrative that's coming out saying it's unseemly to wield political power in your culture. And I would say that's wrong. It depends on what you're wielding political power for. But in a representative republic, we all have political power. And so we're called on to wield it in a godly fashion. So rather than continuing to go down this line of eschewing all power, we need to say, actually, we're grateful that we have this level of influence in our government, and here's how we should use it. And then the third thing is, man, you need to start paying attention to what's coming into your churches, into your ministries, into your Christian schools. And if it's bad, speak up. And if they won't stop bringing it in, then you need to leave and you need to go somewhere that's faithful.
You know, Megan, we just got off this kind of controversy with the new St. Andrews ad. I don't know if you've seen the ad or.
She was walking her dog.
Is it over? Is it over?
It's not over. I've had multiple calls this week already. But one of the things, whenever something like this happened, and this happened with your book, is your book drops, people put out videos, and then they never want to set up a public conversation with you. I mean, I've been asking multiple times on Twitter, hey, let's do a Twitter Spaces together.
I'd raise money for the Russell Moore cross-examination.
100%. Yeah.
I'd raise all the funds.
We could do your judicial show that we've been talking about
Yes.
doing. We got a great TV show.
Maybe we could get one of those progressive foundations to
pay
fund
for it.
to fund a conversation with
Megan and Russell. Yes. So, how many people? I mean, has Russell Moore talked to you? I mean, did Gavin Ortland talk to you? I mean, was there any back and forth conversation on this?
Well, I mean, I haven't tried to reach out to Russell Moore since the book came out. I tried a lot before the book came out.
Yeah, sure.
I tried to talk to people like Andy Stanley, and before he passed away, Tim Keller and Rick Warren, and was never able to reach them. Never heard back. I did exchange.
I got to cut you off here, Andy. We got in a spat with Andy Stanley a couple years ago, and Andy Stanley DMs me his cell phone number, and we start texting back and forth. And he was going to come on the show.
Oh yeah.
And then after back and forth, it's all cordial. There's nothing. We weren't even debating, and he's like, "No, I don't want to come on."
All of a sudden. Yeah, never mind.
He reached out to me. He gave me a cell phone via DM, all that stuff. So next time you want to talk to Andy Stanley, let me know and I can give you a cell phone number.
Okay. I might take you up on that. Because we only converse via Twitter DM. So,
yeah.
But, Gavin and I talked, and it wasn't a super productive conversation. We just are at an impasse. We see the situation very differently. We couldn't come to agreement.
Yeah.
And I can understand he did not want to do a public debate. We had a couple of invitations. He didn't want to do that. So we're not doing that. But we did talk privately. Mm-hmm. And it was cordial. We just don't agree on what the original climate change video said and how I represented it in the book. And at some point, you kind of just have to go, okay, that's fine if you don't want to do it publicly, but we don't agree.
Yeah.
We touched on this yesterday a little bit, Gabe, but I just want to reiterate, and I think this lines up with some of what Megan is saying about what she hopes will happen from the book, that people read this, see this is going on, wake up and speak up. And I think we've, for too long, Christians, evangelical Christians, Bible-believing Christians, have not spoken up.
Yeah.
And so we have this creeping Overton window of what is acceptable. And acceptable in public, what is acceptable morally, what is acceptable in the church, all these things. And Gabe made me watch. You weren't even here yesterday. I think you skipped it probably because of this. But yesterday,
I saw the clips.
Yesterday, Gabe made me watch this lady priestess witch.
Oh, she was so bad.
Given a sermon in a church, all decked out in her priestess witch
Probably
garments.
wasn't a church.
No, not really. It was synagogue of Satan. But it was. She was blessing abortion.
Do you want to play it?
She was saying,
if Jesus were here today, he would be a clinic escort, distracting women from the hatred of the protesters, or an abortion doula, holding women's hands and offering support and love as they end.
She goes on to ask for God's blessing on her own abortion.
If Jesus was here, he'd beat you out the pulpit.
He'd be pushing over pulpits.
Oh my goodness!
But I was just thinking, so that is allowed to happen, and apparently they're not embarrassed.
Yeah.
Apparently she's not ashamed.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, there's a public sentiment that builds up in a culture of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable based on what people say. Like, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable.
Right.
I mean, like, to find a clip of somebody standing up and some white preacher going off about how evil black people are or something, just like some kind of straight, like,
That's obviously not acceptable.
it's not acceptable in our society.
right.
And people, like, somebody who did that would be just shouted down.
Right,
Like,
right.
their church would be closed in a week. It doesn't matter. Like, she can get up there and say something far worse about murdering babies.
Yeah.
And that Jesus would somehow bless that. And she's not been shouted down. Her church hasn't been closed down just by public sentiment.
Right.
That's all I'm talking about.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that I hope your book does, Megan, is I do hope that it wakens people up and recognizes that you do have a voice, you do have a role to play. And even if it's just simply, even with your friends, your small group, in your church community, and it's just being clear about, I love what the Bible says, and I'm in the right way, not in a fleshly way, but in a Christian way, just proud of being a Christian.
Yeah.
Thankful for Christian morality. Not embarrassed by it in the slightest.
Yeah.
And really and willing to say unbiblical conduct is really shameful. And you should not do that.
Megan, thank you so much for your book and your work and for taking the time out today to come on the show. It means a lot to us.
Yeah,
and
appreciate you
Just
very
grateful
much.
for everything that you're doing, sis. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me and being willing to have the disreputable conversation about my book.
Always up for that. Always up for
Absolutely,
that.
yeah. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.
The American church really is gay,
Are you asking me out on a date?
effeminate,
The Bible appears more to whisper when it comes to sexual sin.
shallow,
I said, I want the African American 7.
and full of cowardly leaders.
Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues?
America desperately needs to return to the Father. Either we fall on the rock and are broken, or we fall on the ground and are crushed under that rock. To fall on top of the rock and be broken is exactly the condition in which God brings reformation and revival. So which way is it, Prodigal America? Are you coming home to the Father? Join us this Reformation Day in Fort Worth, Texas, October 31st through November 2nd at Will Rogers Event Center, just days before our presidential election. And join with the thousands of us for the blessing of gathering together with God's people and celebrating God's goodness with beer and psalms. Hear from speakers such as Dr. James White, Pastor Toby Sumter, Pastor Doug Wilson, Dr. George Grant, Gabe and Knox, Steve Dace, and more. Don't forget our Business Makers Conference, Jumpy Castles for the kiddos, after parties, single events, the Pastors Luncheon, the Business Leaders Luncheon, and many more surprises coming. America has squandered her inheritance far too long. It's time she repents and returns home to her Father. Fight, Laugh, Feast presents Prodigal America.